Hello, this is the fourth story from the Book of Magic Animals by Ruth Manning-Sanders. This is a Swedish tale called Lilla Rosa. A king and a queen had one little daughter, who was called Lilla Rosa, and if you searched the world over, you couldn't have found a more beautiful child than that child. And besides being beautiful, she was kind and good, so that everyone loved her. They were very happy, those three, the king, the queen, and their lovely little daughter. But there came a time of sorrow, for the queen died, and the king, who should have known better, but didn't know better, took another wife, a very wicked woman, a widow with a daughter called Lilla, who was as ugly and bad as Lilla Rosa was beautiful and good. The two princesses grew up together in the royal palace, but how the new queen, the wicked stepmother, and her ugly daughter Lilla hated poor Lilla Rosa. They bullied her and made a regular slave of her, ordering her to fetch and carry for them and do all sorts of heavy tasks that a young princess ought not to do. But Lilla Rosa never complained, and she did her best to love and please them, and that made the stepmother hate her all the more bitterly. Now, one day, the stepmother queen and the two girls were walking in the garden, and they heard the head gardener speaking to his man, telling him to fetch an axe that had been left in the wood. But the queen said, "Your man is busy about other things. Lilla Rosa shall fetch the axe." The gardener said, "That is scarcely an errand befitting the daughter of a king, your majesty." The queen said, "Mind your own business. When I give an order, I expect it to be obeyed. Go at once, Lilla Rosa, and bring the axe here." So Lilla Rosa went to the wood and found the axe lying under an oak tree. And there were 3 white doves perching on the handle of it. "Dear little birds," said Lilla Rosa, "you must fly away, because I have to take this axe to my stepmother. But before you go, here is something for you." And she took a piece of cake from her pocket, crumbled it, and held it out on her palm of her hand to the doves. The doves flew up from the handle of the axe. They hovered over Lilla Rosa's outstretched hand and ate up the crumbs. Then they said, "Croo, croo," fluttered their wings and flew up into the oak tree. And Lilla Rosa walked away with the axe. In the tree, the doves were talking. "Croo, croo, what reward shall we give this kind and lovely maiden?" And the first dove said, "I will give that she shall be even more beautiful than she is now. So beautiful the world has never seen her like." And the second dove said, "I will give that her hair shall be fine spun gold." And the third dove said, "I will give that when she laughs, pearls and diamonds shall fall from her lips." And then the doves fluttered their wings and flew away. So, when Lilla Rosa came back with the axe, everyone who saw her was amazed. She was the same Lilla Rosa, and yet she was something more. She shone in beauty like the sun itself. Her hair gleamed golden, and when she gave a little laugh, what fell from her lips? Pearls and diamonds. The stepmother was enraged. If she had hated Lilla Rosa before, she hated her now with a 3-fold hatred. And as to Lilla, she looked by comparison simply hideous. The stepmother couldn't bear it. She gave Lilla Rosa a hard smack and told her to go indoors and wash her hair. Lilla Rosa did go and wash her hair, and it shone more brilliantly than ever. So then the stepmother called the head gardener and told him to take the axe back to the wood and leave it where he had left it before. And she told him also what he must say when she and Lilla came once more to walk in the garden. "And mind you," she said, "if you don't do and say exactly as I bid you, I'll have you whipped with 7 rods. Well, the head gardener wasn't very willing, but what could the poor man do? A queen was a queen, and must be obeyed. So he took the axe and laid it under the oak tree. Next day the stepmother and Longleda went back again to walk in the garden, and the head gardener and his man were planting rose bushes. So when the head gardener saw them coming, he said very loudly, "Bob, I left my axe under the oak tree in the wood. Go and fetch it." And the stepmother said, "No, no, your man is busy. The Princess Longleda shall fetch the axe." And the head gardener said, as he had been told to say, "That is scarcely an errand befitting the daughter of a king, your majesty." But the stepmother said, "Mind your own business. When I give an order, I expect to be obeyed. Go at once, Longleda, and bring the axe here." So off went Longleda, grumbling and muttering to herself. Well, she came to where the axe lay under the oak tree, and there were the 3 white doves perching on the handle of it. "Be off with you!" shouted Longleda, and she took up a handful of earth and threw it at the doves. The doves flew up into the tree, and Longleda walked off with the axe. In the tree the doves were talking. "Coo, coo, what punishment shall we give to that rude maiden?" And the first dove said, "I will give that she shall be twice as ugly as she was before." And the second dove said, "I will give that her hair shall be like a thorn bush." And the third dove said, "I will give that every time she laughs, a toad shall jump out of her mouth." Then the doves fluttered their wings and flew away. When Longleda went back into the garden, the head gardener and his man gave one look at her and rushed away. And as to the queen, she gave a shriek and fainted. For the ugliness of Longleda's face was something that cannot be described. And her hair stuck out all round her head like a thorn bush, and when she laughed to see the gardeners running, a great toad sprang out of her mouth. So, like enough it is true what we are told, that she never laughed again. Well, if the stepmother queen had hated Lilla Rosa before, she hated her from that day with a more deadly hatred. And she said to herself, "Lilla Rosa must die, and Lilla Rosa shall die." And she called a shipmaster to her. The shipmaster was getting ready to sail into a far distant land, and the stepmother said to him, "I will give you 1,000 gold pieces if you will take the Princess Lilla Rosa with you and throw her overboard in mid-ocean. But if you refuse to do it, I will have you broken on the wheel." The shipmaster said, "Give me your 1,000 gold pieces then, for I have no wish to be broken on the wheel." And that very night, when Lilla Rosa was sleeping soundly, for the queen had given her a sleeping draught, he carried her to his ship and set sail. But she looked so lovely as she lay there sleeping, that he said to himself, "No, I cannot do it. I will carry her to a distant land and leave her there, and when I come home without her, how is the queen to know that she still lives?" Yes, that's what the shipmaster planned to do, but his plans miscarried. For when the ship was in mid-ocean, a most terrible storm arose. The ship was wrecked, and the captain and his crew scrambled into the longboat and rowed off, giving no thought to Lilla Rosa. Was that the end, then, of poor Lilla Rosa? No, it wasn't. It seemed that even the rough and roaring waves had pity on her. They floated her away and tossed her up at last on the sandy shore of a little green island. On that green island, Lilla Rosa lived all alone, eating wild berries and roots, drinking the water of a bright little spring, and sleeping among the ferns. But sometimes she felt very sad, and often she stood on the sandy beach looking out over the sparkling waves, hoping to see some ship sailing her way. And no ship came. But something came. One day, as she stood on the edge of the tide, the waves tossing and complaining, threw up two objects at her feet. One was a coconut, the other a slender little figurehead from some wrecked vessel. The figurehead was that of a mermaid. The mermaid was wearing a golden crown. She had her hands crossed over her breast, and though her blue eyes looked rather stern, her lips were smiling. And both the coconut and the figurehead little Rosa picked up and carried to a ferny dell where she used to sleep. With a sharp splinter of stone she pierced the holes in the top of the coconut and drank the milk. Oh, that was good. Then she took a big stone and hammered until she had broken open the coconut. She ate a little of it, and then she thought, surely I should share this treat with the birds. So what did she do? She took the mermaid, set her up on her tail, and tied her with her girdle to the stump of a tree. She put the broken up coconut on the mermaid's crown and said, "Now, little birds, here's your breakfast." Then she went off a little way and sat down amongst the ferns to watch. The sun was warm, the air was balmy, and the waves breaking on the shore said, "Hush!" And again, "Hush!" Lilla Rosa yawned, shut her eyes, and fell asleep. She dreamed that she was listening to a very sweet song, more beautiful than she had ever heard yet. She woke, and still she heard the singing. She got up, and, led by the sound, went back to where she had left the mermaid on the tree stump. What did she see? No tree stump, no mermaid, no coconut, but a blossoming, sweet-smelling linden tree. Perched on the topmost branch of that tree sat a nightingale. Sing, sing. But it was not only the nightingale that sang. Every small leaf of the tree was making music. In fact, it was the most glorious harmony of sound that anyone ever heard this side of heaven. "Oh," said Lilla Rosa, "oh, I don't think I shall ever feel sad again." And every day after that, if she should ever begin to feel sad and lonely, she had only to go and sit under the linden tree and listen to the singing nightingale and the music-making leaves, and all her sadness was changed to joy. In those days she didn't stand on the edge of the sea quite so often, looking for the ship that didn't come, so that when at last a ship did come, she didn't see it, because she was sitting under the linden tree listening to the song of the nightingale and the music of the leaves. It was a magnificent white ship that came sailing, a ship owned by a young prince, and the prince himself was on board, sailing for his pleasure here and there about the world. The sea was calm and the wind offshore, and the ship drew near the island. The marvellous singing flowed out over the water. And the captain said, "Your Highness, this must be an enchanted land." And he would have turned the ship and sailed away, but the prince says, No, I must go on shore and find out where this music comes from." And so on shore he did, and came to where the nightingale and the linden leaves were singing, and there was Lilla Rosa sitting under the linden tree. Oh! The prince's heart seemed to leap right out of his body, for he had never thought that anyone could be so beautiful. And as to Lilla Rosa, she was overjoyed to see a human being after her months of loneliness, that she jumped to her feet and ran to the prince with both hands outstretched. She told the prince a sad story, and he said, "I will take you home, and you shall never be lonely again." And he brought her to his ship and set sail for his own country. You may be sure Lilla Rosa was glad to go there. And yet, well, it saddened her a little to think that never again would she hear that wonderful music. What? Never again? Dear little Rosa, that needn't trouble you. The music is flowing out over the water, and behold, wonder of wonders, the linden tree has uprooted itself, and here it comes flying through the air after the ship, with the nightingale still perched on its topmost branch, and the bird and the leaves are singing their loudest and sweetest. So, to the sound of that music, the prince brought Lilla Rosa home to his palace, and the tree drifted down into the palace garden, and there the prince and Lilla Rosa took spades and planted it. To the sound of that music they fell in love and married, and by Lilla Rosa gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. Now, the cup of their happiness seemed full to overflowing, and in her happiness Lilla Rosa wrote a letter to the king, her father, telling him of everything that had happened to her, but never telling that the stepmother queen was the cause of all her troubles, for she thought, "Why should I make more mischief? We must let bygones be bygones." And when the king read the letter, he rejoiced. He wanted to take ship at once and visit Lilla Rosa. But the stepmother said, "What? And let your kingdom go to rack and ruin in your absence? No, that won't do. Longleda and I will go, and we will bring Lilla Rosa and her husband and the child back to visit you." And though the king was unwilling, he had to agree, for to tell the truth, he was afraid of his wife. So the stepmother and Longleda prepared to set out, but first the stepmother went to consult a witch who was a special friend of hers. And from the witch she got a robe of many-coloured silk embroidered with gold. The robe was beautiful to look at, but woe to the one who put that garment on. The stepmother showed the robe to the king and said, "I am taking this as a present from us both to Lilla Rosa." The king said, "Oh, very pretty, but mind you bring back Lilla Rosa soon, for my heart yearns for her." Well, the stepmother and Longleda set sail. They reached the prince's country without mishap, and Lilla Rosa received them graciously, glad to think that all the old enmity was now forgotten. But the prince, her husband, was not pleased to see them. He said to himself, "No good will come of this." He couldn't forget how cruelly the stepmother had treated Lilla Rosa, and as to Longleda, she was so hideous that he couldn't bear to look at her. She was always scowling, but that was because she dared not laugh, lest a toad jump out of her mouth. So, when the stepmother said that she and Longleda must now be going home, the prince bade them goodbye with a cheerful heart. The stepmother said nothing about taking Lilla Rosa back with them to visit the king, her father. That wasn't part of her plan. But before she went, she took Lilla Rosa up to her room and said, "Dear little daughter, I have a gift for you sent by your father." And she took from its wrappings the beautiful robe of many-coloured silk, embroidered with gold. "Oh, how pretty!" Lilla Rosa said. She would wear the robe that very evening to surprise the prince, and the stepmother laughed and said, "Yes, I'm sure he will be surprised." And then she and Longleda went to their ship and sailed away. That same evening, Lilla Rosa took the robe, held it up before her in front of a long mirror, and smiled to see how beautiful the many-coloured silk shone, and how the gold embroidery glittered. But then it seemed to her that there came a little sighing whisper that said, "No, no, Lilla Rosa, don't put it on." And so she stood for a moment doubtful, and then she thought, I mustn't be silly. This is a present from my dear father. And she drew the robe over her head. What happened? Lilla Rosa disappeared. And there in front of the mirror stood a great golden goose. And the golden goose gave a wailing cry and flew out of the open window. From that hour the linden ceased its playing, and the song of the nightingale was heard no more. The prince, distracted with grief, sought for Lilla Rosa high and low. His people tried to comfort him, saying that Lilla Rosa must have gone with her stepmother and Longleda to visit the king, her father. But the prince said, "No, no, she would not do that without telling me." He wept and would not be comforted. And as to Lilla Rosa's little son, he cried and cried. Now, on a calm night of full moon, when one of the prince's fishermen was out to sea, he saw a great golden bird swimming towards him on the path of the moon. All amazed, for he had never seen so beautiful a bird, he rested on his oars, gazing at it, almost holding his breath, lest he scare it away. But the great golden bird didn't seem at all scared. It swam close up to the side of the boat, and then it spoke. Yes, it spoke in a human voice. And this is what it said. "Good evening, fisherman. How are things at home in the royal palace? Does my linden play? Does my nightingale sing? Does my little son laugh by night and by day? Does my lord always make himself merry?" And as if in a dream, the fisherman answered, "At home in the royal palace it goes ill. The linden plays not, the nightingale sings not. Thy little son weeps both by night and by day. Thy lord never makes himself merry." The beautiful golden goose sighed and said, "Poor me, who now float on the blue waves, and never more can be what I have been. Good night, fisherman. I will come twice more, and then never again." Then the bird swam away, and the fisherman, greatly troubled, rowed to shore, hurried to the prince, and told him what he had seen and heard. The prince said, "If you will catch that bird and bring it to me, I will make you rich for life." So next evening the fisherman took a net, rowed out to where he had seen the golden bird. The night was dark. For a time he looked this way and that over the water and saw nothing. But then the moon rose and lit the waves, and in the path of the moon came the great golden bird swimming towards him. The bird came to the side of the boat and said, as it had said that night before, "Good evening, fisherman. How are things at home in the royal palace? Does my linden play? Does my nightingale sing? Does my little son laugh by night and by day? Does my lord always make himself merry?" And the fisherman answered, "At home in the royal palace it goes ill. Thy linden plays not, thy nightingale sings not, thy little son weeps both by night and by day, thy lord never makes himself merry." Then the great golden bird spoke again. "Poor me, who now float on the blue waves, and never more can be what I have been. Good night, fisherman, I will come once more, and then never again." And it was about to swim away when the fisherman leaned from the boat and cast his net over it. Then the bird beat fiercely with its wings and screamed, "Let go quickly or hold fast," and at the same moment changed itself into a great serpent. And the serpent writhed and twisted and beat upon the net. The fisherman was terrified, but he held onto the net with all his might. The serpent lashed the net this way and that, but still the fisherman held on, and still the serpent hissed and writhed and screamed, "Let go quickly or hold fast." And all at once it changed itself into a huge fire-spitting dragon and burst through the net, which so terrified the fisherman he made haste back to shore and ran to tell the prince. The prince said, "Tomorrow I will come with you, for catch that bird I must and will." So on the next evening he went with the fisherman upon the sea and waited for the moon to rise. But black wind-driven clouds covered the sky. The prince could hardly see a yard in front of him, and the boat was tossed this way and that on the blustering waves. "My prince, had we not better row home now?" said the fisherman. But the prince said, "No, no, no." And all at once the clouds parted, the moon shone out, and swimming towards them, now on the crest of a wave and now in the hollow, came the great golden bird. The bird swam up close to the boat and spoke. "Good evening, fisherman. Good evening, my prince. How are things at home in the royal palace? Does my linden play? Does my nightingale sing? Does my little son laugh both by night and by day? Does my lord always make himself merry?" And the prince answered, At home in the royal palace it goes ill, the linden plays not, the nightingale sings not, thy little son weeps both by night and by day, and I, thy lord, never make myself merry. The beautiful golden bird sighed and appeared very sorrowful and said, Ah, poor me, who now float on the blue waves, and never more can be what I have been. Good night, fisherman, good night, my lord, now I come hither nevermore. The golden bird was about to swim away, but the prince leaned from the boat and caught her in his arms, and she screamed and struggled and beat with the wings and cried out, Let go quickly, or hold fast, let go quickly, or hold fast, and turned at once from a golden bird into an enormous serpent. The serpent writhed and twisted and tried to slip out of the prince's arms, but he held it fast. And it thrust its fangs into his arms and lashed him with its tail and screamed again, Let go quickly, or hold fast, and all at once changed itself into a monstrous dragon whose flaming mouth spat fire into the prince's face. My prince, my prince, cried the terrified fisherman, let the thing go. But the prince wouldn't let the dragon go. He clung on all the harder, and the dragon roared out, Let go quickly, or hold fast. Let go quickly, or hold fast, and turned itself into a huge vulture that beat with its wings and pecked with its fierce beak and tore the prince's hair out by the roots. The prince shut his eyes and turned his face away, but he gripped that vulture with all his might, and it screamed again, Let go quickly, hold fast, and turned itself into a great golden stag that prodded with its horns and kicked with its feet, but still the prince held on. Into furious shape after furious shape that creature changed itself, and still it struggled and screamed, Let go quickly, or hold fast. And still the prince held on, shuddering, half fainting, and drawing his breath in great gasps. He clung to the thing that fought and kicked and bit and scratched and hissed and spat, until with one last great cry it lay still in his arms. And the being that the prince now clasped in his arms was his own dear wife, his beloved Lilla Rosa. And so he wrapped her in his mantle, and the fisherman rowed them home. Now the story draws to a close, for there is little more to tell. Next day the prince and Lilla Rosa and their little son took ship and set out to visit the king, Lilla Rosa's father. And when the ship came to land and the stepmother saw who they were that stepped out of it, she gripped Long Leda by the arm, and together they stole out of the palace and fled away. Where they went, nobody knew, and certainly nobody cared. The old king was overjoyed to see his Lilla Rosa again, for the stepmother had reported her dead. So, after a long and happy visit, the prince and Lilla Rosa and their little son went home again to their own country. And there the linden tree plays still, and the nightingale sings. There Lilla Rosa's little son laughs both by night and by day, and there the prince at all time makes himself merry. Thank you.